Dear brothers and sisters in Christ Jesus, we are entering into the second day of Novena to St. Clare of Assisi. The theme for today is Clare, a historical person. Who was this Clare of Assisi? The more we go deeper into the documents of the 13th century, the more radical becomes the question. Did Clare of Assisi ever exist? This echoes the question of Jacques Le Goff in his magisterial biography of King Louis IX. It is true that if we only read the writings of Francis, we might well doubt the Assisi woman's existence, since Clare is not named even once. Turning the pages of some lovely insights from Jacques Delorme, we could legitimately come to think that Clare never passed through Francis' life. The saint never names his first disciple. Any attempt to make an historical reconstruction of the profile of the woman of Assisi must inevitably play between these two extremes. Not only the silence of Francis, but also the silence of the other Franciscan sources, or at least some of them. So, for instance, while in his first life of Francis, written by Thomas of Celano between 1228 and 1230, Clare is given such an exaltation as to be almost embarrassing. While in the so-called second life by the same Thomas of Celano, composed almost 15 years later, Clare has vanished altogether and her name is not even mentioned. What is the reason for this certainly censorious decision? If we now jump forward some 15 years, we see that the picture has completely changed. In 1244, the General Chapter of the Order of Friars Minor realized the need to make a new collection of evidence about Francis in order to produce a new life of the saint. This time too, as we have noted, Thomas of Celano was charged with the task. He finished by 1247 and gave his work the title of Memoriale Propositi. This work has more generally been known as the Second Life because it was seen as a superseding his first biography. Clare has vanished from the Second Life. Thomas of Celano does not even tell us her name. It is clear that some extremely relevant change has intervened. We see this, for instance, in chapter 10, where Thomas speaks of Francis' first visit to Sant'Amiano. In the first life, this was made the occasion to speak about Clare and the Thamianites. Here, there is no sign of them. This silence is even more astounding when we recall that it is here, in the second life, that Celano speaks for the first time of the mysterious dialogue between Francis and the crucifix which he found at Sant'Amiano, and also of the saint's prophecy about a community of women which had been made while he was repairing this little chapel. Again in chapters 204 to 207, where Celano speaks of the rapport between Francis and the sisters, he chooses to make no mention of Clare's name. Why this silence? What has gone on between the exaltation of the first life and the implied denunciation of the second life? In fact, Clare was not uninvolved in the tormented times that shook Francis' order in the years immediately after Francis' death. In 1230, soon after the encounter between Clare and Gregory IX at Sant'Amiano, the order held an important general chapter in Assisi. In view of the fact that the chapter was unable to pronounce on certain important questions which were crucial to the future of the order itself, There must have been many such discussions. The brothers decided to appoint a commission to present these unresolved questions to the Pope. The questions to be submitted to the Pope concerned obedience to the Gospel, observance of the Testament of Francis, the use of money, poverty, the friars' houses, confession, preaching, the reception of the novices to obedience, the election of the minister general, and their dealings with the monasteries of women. The last question put to the Pope concerned the rapport with women's monasteries. The rule forbade the friars from going into communities of women, except where they had received a special license from the Holy See. By the middle of the 13th century, then Clare's situation had radically changed. Even within the Franciscan movement itself, we could say that she was not really well known. For instance, Bonaventure, when he was in Paris, only knew about her in a rather vague way. So much so that when he became Minister General some years later, he had to seek information about her from Brother Leo before he could write a letter to the poor Clare. At the same time, however, Clare was right at the heart of the Franciscan family. She and her sisters lived at San Damiano, in the very place which held the decisive memory of the Blessed Father's conversion when the crucifix spoke to him. The account of that dialogue began to appear in Franciscan hagiographical literature around the year 1240s. It is highly likely that in this other matter too, Clare and her sisters were the sources of similar diffusion of information. At the moment when any number of passages from the Second Life were putting the brethren on their guard against frequenting the women's monasteries too much. The passage about the dialogue with the crucifix reminded them that if they wanted to visit the place of Francis' conversion, then they had to go to San Damiano. On the other hand, this silence was not only simply something imposed from outside, but was also a personal choice on the part of Clare herself. In the whole of her writings, she says not one word about her own personal life, and yet here we have a silence which speaks loudly. There is no missing the great number of times Clare speaks of Francis in her writings. Clare's choice of silence seems to have been an option for allowing the memory of Francis to speak instead.